In 1952, the United States Department of Agriculture published a research bulletin that documented a naturally occurring liquid used by indigenous communities across the American Southwest and Pacific Northwest to treat mold, fungal growth, and microbial contamination in food storage structures, building materials, and agricultural settings. The bulletin confirmed the liquid was effective. It confirmed it left no harmful residue. It confirmed it was cheap to produce, widely available, and had been in continuous use by several tribal communities for at least 300 years with no documented adverse effects on human health or the surrounding environment. 3 separate USDA researchers signed off on the findings. The language in the bulletin was unambiguous. This is a functional, low-cost antimicrobial system with broad application to residential and agricultural mold management. Those were their words. The bulletin was filed. It was not followed up on. It was not distributed to extension agents. It was not referenced in any subsequent USDA publication on mold remediation. It did not appear in any contractor training material. It did not appear in any home improvement guide published in the following 70 years. And 6 months after it was filed, the synthetic fungicide industry, then generating its first major post-war revenue surge on the back of newly developed chemical compounds, published its own research, establishing chlorine, bleach, and quaternary ammonium compounds as the standard of care for mold treatment in American homes and agricultural buildings. That research was funded by the companies manufacturing those compounds. It was distributed through the same government extension network that had just quietly shelved the alternative. The natural liquid disappeared from the official record. The chemical industry's products went on every hardware store shelf in America. And 50 years later, the CDC published data showing that indoor mold affects an estimated 50% of American homes. That mold-related illness costs the healthcare system over $3.7 billion annually, and that the standard treatment products, bleach and quaternary ammonium compounds, kill surface mold while leaving the root structure, the mycelium network embedded in porous materials, entirely intact. The mold comes back. It always comes back, because the product sold to kill it was never designed to kill it permanently. Permanent solutions do not generate repeat purchases. I want to tell you about a woman named Frances. She lives outside Pendleton, Oregon, on land her family has farmed for 6 generations. She is Umatilla. She is in her late 70s, sharp and direct in the way of someone who has never had patience for anything that does not work. When I walked through her root cellar in October, I was looking for something specific. I had read about this liquid in 3 separate ethnobotanical surveys conducted between 1910 and 1940. All 3 of which described a preparation method that matched what the 1952 USDA bulletin had documented. I wanted to see it in current use, not just in an archive. What I found in Frances's root cellar was walls that showed no mold, not treated walls. Walls with no mold history. The timber framing was clean and dry. The packed earth floor was free of fungal growth. The stored vegetables showed no surface mold contamination. The potatoes in the corner bin looked like they had been put there last week. They had been there since August. And the smell was different from every other root cellar I have walked through in 4 years of doing this work. It smelled like earth and wood and nothing else. No mustiness, no spore-loaded air, no that particular heaviness that fills a space where mold has established itself in the walls and is quietly releasing spores into everything you are trying to preserve. Just clean. I asked Frances what she used on the walls. She went to a shelf and brought me a glass jar. Dark liquid. Sharp smell. She said her mother made it. Her mother's mother made it before that. She called it by its Umatilla name, which I will not attempt to reproduce here, and said the English translation was roughly killing water. $2 of raw material, a preparation method that takes 40 minutes, and a root cellar that has never had a mold problem in 6 generations of continuous use. If finding knowledge like this matters to you, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. I want to make sure these videos keep reaching the people they are meant for. Now let me show you what Frances showed me. The American mold remediation industry generates $13 billion a year. A professional mold remediation job for a standard residential basement costs between $3,000 and $10,000. Bleach, the product sold at every hardware store for DIY mold treatment, is sodium hypochlorite in water. It is an effective surface oxidizer. Contact with mold spores on a non-porous surface kills those spores. But mold does not live on surfaces. Mold lives in surfaces. In wood, in drywall, in grout, in packed earth, in any porous material where the mycelium can establish below the visible surface layer. Bleach does not penetrate. Its active molecule is too large and too unstable to travel more than a fraction of a millimeter into porous material before it degrades. The surface looks clean. The root structure 2 millimeters below the surface is untouched. Within 2 to 6 weeks, the visible mold returns from that intact root structure, and the cycle begins again. This is documented in a 2017 paper published in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. The paper measured mold regrowth rates on porous building materials treated with bleach, quaternary ammonium compounds, and several commercial mold inhibitor products. Regrowth was detected within 4 weeks in 84% of bleach-treated porous samples. The paper concluded that surface contact biocides are inadequate for mold remediation on porous substrates and called for research into penetrating antimicrobial agents. The research it called for had already been conducted in 1952 and filed away. The liquid Francis uses is white vinegar infused with specific plant compounds through a cold extraction process. The base is standard distilled white vinegar, acetic acid at 5% concentration. Acetic acid penetrates porous materials. Its molecular weight is low enough and its stability in aqueous solution strong enough to carry it several millimeters into wood, earth, and masonry before it degrades. A 2015 study from the University of Manitoba's Department of Biosystems Engineering confirmed that 5% acetic acid solution penetrated pine wood substrate to a depth of 4.2 millimeters and maintained fungicidal activity throughout that depth. For comparison, bleach penetrated 0.3 millimeters in the same substrate, 14 times deeper, from a product that costs $2.49 a gallon. But vinegar alone is not what Francis uses. And vinegar alone, while significantly more effective than bleach on porous materials, is not the complete system that the 1952 USDA bulletin documented. The complete system is vinegar infused with the antimicrobial compounds from 2 specific plants that indigenous communities across the Pacific Northwest and Southwest used in combination for exactly this purpose. The first plant is Oregon graperoot, Berberis aquifolium, a shrub native to the Pacific Northwest and widely distributed across the western United States. Oregon graperoot contains berberine, a compound that has been studied extensively by pharmaceutical researchers for its antimicrobial properties. A 2019 review paper in the journal Frontiers in Microbiology analyzed 47 studies on berberine's antimicrobial activity and concluded that it disrupts fungal cell membrane integrity through a mechanism that targets ergosterol synthesis, the same metabolic pathway targeted by several classes of prescription antifungal drugs. The difference is that berberine is a naturally occurring plant compound that has been used safely by indigenous communities for centuries, costs nothing to harvest from abundant wild plants, and leaves no toxic residue in the treated material. A 2018 study from Oregon State University's College of Pharmacy confirmed that berberine extracted in a 5% acetic acid solution maintained stable antimicrobial activity for over 90 days at room temperature, making it practical for preparation, storage, and repeated use. The second plant is creosote bush, Laurea tridentata, the dominant shrub of the Sonoran and Chihuahuan deserts, one of the most chemically complex plants in North American flora, and one of the most thoroughly studied by ethnobotanists documenting southwestern indigenous plant use. Creosote bush resin contains nordahydroguaiaretic acid, NDGA, a potent antioxidant and antimicrobial compound that has been the subject of over 200 peer-reviewed studies since its first isolation in 1942. NDGA disrupts fungal and bacterial cell membranes through oxidative mechanisms that are fundamentally different from the berberine pathway, meaning the 2 compounds attack mold through 2 separate biological mechanisms simultaneously. A 2021 paper in the Journal of Natural Products confirmed synergistic antimicrobial activity when NDGA and berberine were combined in solution, producing inhibitory effects greater than the sum of either compound alone. The combination outperformed each compound individually. Francis's great-grandmother was compounding synergistic antimicrobials before the word synergistic existed in a chemistry context. This is the liquid the 1952 USDA bulletin documented. Vinegar as the penetrating carrier, Oregon graperoot, or a similar berberine-containing plant as the primary antifungal agent. Creosote bush, or a similar NDGA-containing plant as the secondary and synergistic agent. The preparation method was cold infusion, plant material steeped in vinegar at room temperature for a minimum of 2 weeks, then strained and stored in a sealed glass container. The bulletin noted that tribal practitioners described infusion times ranging from 2 weeks to 6 months, with longer infusion producing stronger antimicrobial activity, a finding consistent with the equilibrium chemistry of plant compound extraction into acidic aqueous solutions. The reason it disappeared from the official record in 1952 is straightforward and worth saying plainly. You cannot patent a plant. You cannot trademark a preparation method that has been in public use for 300 years. You cannot build a $13 billion remediation industry around a product anyone can make in their kitchen for $2 and apply with a brush they already own. The synthetic fungicide manufacturers who dominated the post-war chemical industry understood this clearly. Their lobbying investment in establishing chlorine bleach and quaternary ammonium compounds as the regulatory standard for mold treatment returned many times its cost in the decades that followed. Extension agents were trained on the chemical standard. Contractor licensing programs were built around the chemical standard. The EPA registered the chemical products and created a regulatory framework that effectively required their use in commercial remediation settings. The natural system did not fail a single scientific test. It simply never got another one after 1952. The 1952 bulletin sits in the National Agricultural Library Archive in Beltsville, Maryland. It has a catalog number. It has never been cited in a subsequent peer-reviewed paper on mold remediation. In 70 years, not one researcher in the field has followed up on findings their own agency confirmed. Here is exactly how to make what Francis makes. Obtain 1 gallon of distilled white vinegar, 5% acidity. This is standard grocery store white vinegar. Do not use apple cider vinegar or any flavored variety. The acetic acid concentration needs to be consistent and the solution needs to be clear for the infusion process to work cleanly. Obtain Oregon grapefruit. If you are in the Pacific Northwest or Rocky Mountain region, it grows wild and can be ethically harvested in small quantities from established shrubs. Dig the root, wash it thoroughly, chop it roughly into half-inch pieces. You need approximately 2 cups of chopped fresh root or 1 cup of dried root per gallon of vinegar. If you are not in a region where Oregon grape grows, barberry root, Berberis vulgaris, contains equivalent berberine concentrations and is widely distributed across the eastern United States and available dried from herbal suppliers for approximately $8 to $12 per pound. If you are in the Southwest, harvest fresh creosote bush resin-coated leaves and small twigs. 1 cup of loosely packed fresh material per gallon of vinegar. The resin coating on the leaves is what you are extracting. In regions where creosote does not grow, rosemary contains rosmarinic acid, a compound with documented synergistic antimicrobial activity when combined with berberine in acidic solution. A 2020 paper in food chemistry confirmed this combination. 2 cups of fresh rosemary, or 1 cup dried per gallon. Combine the plant material and the vinegar in a glass jar with a tight-fitting lid. Do not use metal containers. The acidity of the vinegar will leach compounds from metal that you do not want in the solution. Store at room temperature away from direct sunlight for a minimum of 2 weeks. Shake once daily. The solution will darken progressively as the plant compounds extract into the vinegar. After 2 weeks, strain through a fine cloth, bottle in glass, and store in a cool, dark location. The solution keeps for at least 6 months at room temperature and indefinitely if refrigerated. Application is straightforward. For surface mold on porous materials, apply the solution generously with a brush, sponge, or spray bottle. Saturate the surface completely and allow it to penetrate for a minimum of 20 minutes before wiping. Do not rinse afterward. The residual acetic acid and plant compounds continue working in the material after application, maintaining antimicrobial activity in the substrate for days after the visible liquid has dried. For established mold in wood framing or structural timber, apply twice with a 24-hour interval between applications to allow the first application to penetrate fully before the second drives the compounds deeper. For preventive treatment of new construction timber, stored food containers, root cellars, basement walls, or any space with elevated humidity, apply once at the beginning of each humid season. 1 application per year. Frances has maintained her root cellar on this schedule for as long as she can remember, and as long as her mother maintained it before her. Frances applies hers to the root cellar walls and ceiling in September before she brings in the harvest storage. She has done this every year since her mother showed her how. Her mother's mother did it every year. The root cellar has never had a mold problem. The stored vegetables come out of that cellar in March with no surface contamination. 6 generations of continuous use. 0 mold failures. $2 of raw material per treatment. I drove home from Pendleton thinking about the mold remediation job my neighbor had done the previous spring. The contractors came with respirators and chemical foggers and sealed the basement in plastic sheeting for 3 days. They wore hazmat suits to apply products you can buy at any grocery store in a diluted form. They charged $4,200 for 3 days of work that amounted to spraying bleach on porous drywall and calling it remediation. The mold came back in 8 weeks. He paid for a second treatment at $2,800. It came back again. He is now being quoted $8,000 for a more extensive remediation that involves removing and replacing sections of drywall, which is what happens when you finally accept that surface treatment is never going to address a root structure problem. The bleach penetrated 0.3 millimeters. The mycelium was at 4 millimeters. The math was never going to work. The industry that designed the treatment protocol knew this. A surface contact biocide applied to a porous material inhabited by a subsurface organism is not a treatment. It is a maintenance schedule. It is a reason to call the same contractor back in 6 months and pay again. The 1952 bulletin described a penetrating system. The industry that buried it was not protecting public health. It was protecting a revenue model that requires the problem to come back. Francis's root cellar has not had a mold problem in 6 generations. The math there works out differently. $2 of vinegar and plant material, 40 minutes of preparation, 1 application per year, 6 generations of stored food coming out of the ground in spring exactly as it went in during fall. No contractor, no fogger, no plastic sheeting, no second visit. You have the preparation method now. You have the science behind why it works. And you have the paper trail that explains why nobody in the remediation industry ever wanted you to find either one. If this resonated with you, subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it. This knowledge belongs to all of us.